Listen for words from the Gospel of John, chapter 15, 1 to 9. Sometime after, there was a Jewish festival, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, near the Sheep's Gate, there is a pool with 5 porticos. Its Hebrew name is Bethesda. The place was crowded with sick people. Those who were blind, lame, paralysed, lying there waiting for the water to move. An angel of God would come down to the pool from time to stir up the water. The first one to step into the water after it had been stirred would be completely healed. One person there had been sick for 38 years. Jesus, who knew this person had been sick for a long time, said, "Do you want to be healed?" "Rabbi," the sick one answered, "I don't have anyone to put me into the pool once the water has been stirred up. By the time I get there, someone else has gone in ahead of me." Jesus replied, "Stand up. Pick up your mat and walk." The person was immediately healed and picked up the mat and walked away. For the word that was in the beginning, for the word that invites and inspires, for the word embodied in us, we give thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to people on Zoom. It was John 5, that's all right. You said John 15, that's okay. John 5, that's all right. John 15 is a good chapter as well. She read the right words. She did. No. My first point to this text, the contradictions of society and religion. In our reading in John 5, that's where I mentioned it, I had it in my text. We read that Jesus visits Jerusalem during a religious holiday. All Jewish males were expected to come to the temple 3 times a year. Yet Jesus does not go to worship, does he? He doesn't go to worship in the temple. So if you're listening, where does he go? To the pool. Instead he goes to the pool named Bethesda near the Sheep Gate at the far northern end of the Temple Mount. There Jesus encounters many variously abled people, blind, lame, paralysed. As Fritz Wendt notes in his article, The Politics of Scripture, addressing poverty when the system fails, Jesus bypasses all the centres of power of Jerusalem and goes to the place where no one has power. This hospital-like place, he continues, around the pool is dank, it's smelly, and filled with people lying around, waiting for a miracle, hoping for wholeness and new life. The sheep gate is mentioned in Nehemiah and was probably used to wash sheep being brought to the temple for sacrifice. Most temple worshippers would avoid this place because, as you would expect, it's unclean. And the Hebrew word Bethesda is quite interesting given this context. It comes from 2 Hebrew words, bait, meaning house, I guess place, residence, and hesed, which we know, which means mercy, kindness, fidelity. So this word Bethesda, translated, means house of kindness, house of mercy, house of faithfulness. So the variously abled, the sick, the injured, in overcrowded conditions, were not supported by the religious, social and economic systems of Jewish society, except to authorise this token pool where it was a bit like a lottery. You don't always get there. What a contradiction. A house of kindness. And to say, before we start judging others, all societies, the church throughout history, and in our post-democratic age, I'm calling it forget postmodernism, we're in a post-democratic age, we've all displayed such contradictions. I worked at Edward Eagle Lodge, which is the Uniting Church home for homeless people, for a year, and I saw the way that we even contradicted ourselves there. Ministers would turn up in suits and ties and tell people if they got their act together, they would be better. And I stood amongst the crowd, torn T-shirt, jeans, and they were cursing. I was trying to learn to be one of them, one of the people. We've displayed such contradiction in our society when it comes to alleviating poverty and offering significant care, support and inclusion of the poor, not just economically, but culturally, socially. My second point, encountering the dried out and socially disvalued. Here at this pool, in these corridors of despair, Jesus encounters a person who has health challenges for 38 years. Now, at first, and we sort of sat around at church council and talked about this, and as I thought about this, some of us for 38 years can live in poor self-esteem. So I thought, well, 38 years, any one of us for 38 years could be lost in something that we allow to disempower us. And we announce here that we can move. We can move past the things that keep us, if you like the metaphor, keep us somewhere powerless for 38 years. We can move past that. Now, the Greek word that describes this person as a paralytic literally means dried out. Dried out, probably not just in body, but in spirit, in the inner life and meaning. And here again, symbolically, Jesus sees him, and often it's metaphoric for Jesus, who represents God, sees him, sees us. Jesus observes his condition, probably the aged Matt. I wonder if he changed it over 38 years. The condition of his body, his clothes, and discerns that he's been there for a while. Jesus would have had compassion for this person, as we read. We read later on in chapter 12, I think, where 11 and 12, where Lazarus dies and Jesus weeps that his friend Lazarus dies. So Jesus would have had compassion in this place. Thirdly, the challenge of our withered truth and practice, unlearning and relearning faith and practice. Jesus sees, engages and offers this man, a stranger, someone in the crowd, a marginalised person, compassionate community through this engagement. So that in this engagement, Jesus displays that we are all subjects with agency who interact with other subjects. It's not subject-object, it's subjects. We are intersubjective. You and I, Liz, we're intersubjective. So that relationality is primary. And we are to become equals. It's always a process. I know that when I was at Edward Eagle Lodge, it took me a long time to learn, and I did, to sit and learn how can I meaningfully, respectfully be with these people for whom I care? How can I treat them as my brothers and sisters? And it took a while. And this involves responsivity, which includes ethics. And so Jesus engages him with a question. And I think the situation went slower than John tells us, but he says, "What do you really want? What do you really want?" A question which seeks to activate an awakening of not just his conscious motives and reasons for his actions, because he's got some, but what are his unconscious drives that govern his life and have kept him very settled for 38 years. So Jesus engages his withered will, his despairing desire, seeking to uncover, activate and subvert his unconscious dependence on magic, like our society does with capitalism, our consumer society, We have these little thrills and things, and his unconscious dependency, therefore, which is symbolically illustrated by this tokenistic pool. You wait around for a year, maybe something good will happen. I win the lottery. Jesus engages him with this question to activate his awareness that his desire for total well-being is sedated by the supposed magical qualities of the pool, provided by the religious social system and its small-scale solution to those suffering ill health. He engages him to connect him to his powerlessness, his dried-up self-esteem, created probably by family and certainly by society. Now, this person's awakening begins, as anybody who's been in therapy or who is a therapist here, the story awakening begins where we speak the truth, and the truth often has to start with our resignation and our hopelessness. Naming that is part of the journey. And as he reflects on the causes of his powerlessness, a dialogue, an engagement of subjects has begun. So this man shares that he has no social networks to assist him to the pool. And in the ancient Near East, illness was physical and social, and it involved a disvalued state of being in which persons' social networks were disrupted and significantly lost. So Jesus creates value of being and community, sees, engages and offers this man, a stranger, compassionate community, and says, "Stand up, take your mat and walk." The Greek word for stand up is the word for arise, which is resurrection, new life. And this man doesn't even know Jesus, obviously hasn't heard about him. And this was the Sabbath, when you're not supposed to do these sorts of things. He wasn't supposed to stand up. Jesus wasn't supposed to heal him. So in this process, this person's own faith and reflection raises him to new life. In the verses after this story, we've finished at verse 9, from verse 10 onwards, a group of influential religious leaders are concerned that Jesus' actions violate and transgress the Sabbath. They contradict the honour-shame system where a person of certain social status can't really speak to a person of a lower status, particularly when they're unclean. Subverts the purity code which keeps that society safe. They seek to defend the established normative order, and they decide to persecute Jesus. The rejection of Jesus in this story then is a rejection of the possibility of new and unprecedented ways of knowing the divine source of life and ordering the life of faith and the ordering of inclusive community. Brian Stoffrigan notes that Robin Capon, in his book Between Noon and Three, writes that in this story, the story operates at a number of levels. It witnesses to the love of God in Jesus, he writes, that seeks the total well-being and new life for this person. Jesus arouses his desire so that his withered hand is healed. He inspires his will and freedom to a new life and enables him to reclaim his place as equal in the covenant community of faith. And symbolically, to introduce new insights, Jesus carried out a prophetic task, making the point that all religious observances, including the Sabbath, are to serve the total well-being of human life, particularly for those marginalised. And even further to this, Walter Brueggemann writes that this encounter points to a prophetic task, and I think he puts it really well. It is to maintain a destabilising presence so that the system is not equated with reality, so that alternatives are thinkable, so that the absolute claims of the system can be critiqued, even if some presidents suggest the system can't be critiqued, or in fact suggest the system doesn't work. So in this story, John's Jesus leads readers, past and present, we the sheep, to this undesirable space and its truths to create in us an unlearning and set us on the road of relearning. You see, normative ways of thinking, feeling and action are often not preferred to the new. The reality is that all social spaces are shaped by those who have social and political power. Those who control and distribute all resources always allocate them in the interest of those who have power and who amass wealth. And the political religious leaders in our story provided extremely minimal resources for the well-being of those gathered around this pool. And they seek to silence anyone contradicting their power, policies and actions. As Robert Capon writes, whenever someone attempts to introduce a radically different insight to people whose minds have been formed by an old and well-worked out way of thinking, they're up against an obstacle. Old ways of thinking, feeling and acting so well established that people invariably prefer it to the new. To conclude, creating unlearning and relearning in self and community. This story is about us. Yes, it is a call to address the causes of poverty, and we do it well. Yet further, it is a call to unlearn and relearn who we are as self, what our inner life has. Do we have aspects of those 38 years where things are in us, in our unconscious, that motivate us and we don't know they're there? How do we keep processing to be an intersubjective community? It is a call to an awakening that to be human is to engage equally with another subject. That the other is not an object of poverty, condition or identity, but the other is always an equal subject, and we continue always to humbly learn what that means. Jesus, in an honour-shame culture, broke the social rules by engaging this person as an equal. What a message. As I shared at Edward Eagle Lodge, I just kept on learning and making huge mistakes as to, all of a sudden I'm here and they're there. And we are called to live out that to be human, we are intersubjective. Liz, you and I, we're equals. We are. so that relationality and equal meaning making is primary. And this involves responsiveness, which is about ethics. And this requires unlearning, always requires unlearning, which involves learning about our unconscious. As a person in our text, I believe, learnt and moved and raised into a new space. I wonder whether he joined the Jesus community. Kelly Oliver writes, "We're called to critically examine not only our conscious motives and reasons for our actions and values, but also our unconscious drives and effects that affect, even govern, if not determine, our actions, our values, our view of ourselves and a view of each other. Without such ongoing self-examination, and Kate's got a great journaling class, which Kate Scholl, which I think is one of the resources where we can step back and look and write and learn and gather new resources. Is that right, Kate? She's somewhere there. She's nodding? She's nodding. So without self-examination and questioning, without interpreting and reinterpreting the meaning of our actions and values, we risk being shaped by empty and meaningless principles in whose name we can kill off otherness. That's not me, that's Kelly Oliver. So to conclude, by this, as Kelly Oliver says, Derrida suggests, if we are to enact a justice worthy of its name, we need to go beyond traditional moral theory that holds individuals responsible for their actions. So that we need, Kelly Oliver says, Derrida's view of a hyperbolic ethics, which is, hyperbole is it's sort of like just this exaggerated, amazing way of being. We need a truly hyperbolic ethics that holds us responsible, not only for our actions, beliefs, desires and values, and the others' responses, but also for the unconscious life that informs our actions and the actions of others. I'm going to suggest that we have a minute's silence where you ask yourself the question, or ask, has anything in this reflection awakened a stirring in the pools of your heart? So just in a minute's silence, I invite you to just reflect on anything that's been stirred in your heart